Uh, Welcome to this CETRA series fall lecture. This is my first event as the director of CETRA, so I'm very happy to be here for this special first event of a tenure. I'm a new face for some of you, but I have a long affiliation with CETRA both as a former participant of the CETRA Research Summer School and also as a member of its teaching staff. First of all, he's not here right now. He's teaching right now, but I think it's the right venue to thank the former director, Peter Bologna, for his leadership over the last 4 years, including through the difficult pandemic years. Before we begin, I'd like to just take the opportunity to mention some recent CETRA activities that may be of interest to this audience. The latest volume, the 7th edition of the CETRA book series, Translation, Interpreting, and Transfer, has just been published yesterday with the title Recharting Territories in Intradisciplinarity in Translation Studies, a volume edited by Giselle Diones Io da Silva and Mayra Radiccioni. So a little information about this series. It's a relatively new series founded in 2018, so it's 4 years old. Both of the editors are here present, so that's lovely to see. Luc van Doorselaar here in person and Heidi Kotze online. The series is a home for monographs. It's a home for edited volumes and for the CETRA papers for participants from the CETRA Research Summer School. So do please take a look at that. We'll drop some links in the chat so you can have a look at that volume and the series. Speaking of the CETRA Summer School, we can look back on a very successful summer school this year with our chair professor, Kaisa Koskinen. And I'm pleased to also announce, not for the first time, but to repeat that the 2023 CETRA chair professor next year will be Hanna Risku, professor of translation studies at the University of Vienna. For those of you interested in more information about the summer school, stay tuned. There will be a call for participants coming up. You probably noticed that this lecture is jointly organized by CETRA, by the Center for Translation Studies, and also by CERES, the Center for Reception Studies at KU Leuven. The reason being that our speaker today, Professor Olha Lehka-Paul, will be presenting research at the interdisciplinary nexus of these two domains. Ola was on campus yesterday as well to teach a guest session for our master's students in the course Translation Studies and Methodology. So thank you for doing that as well. On the invitation of Professor Luc van Doorselaar, a former CETRA director and a familiar face for many of you. I'd like to give the word now to Luc, who will briefly introduce our speaker. Ola will speak for about an hour and we'll reserve some time for questions at the end. So I'll turn it over to Luc.
So I go there.
Yes.
Yeah, hi everyone online and in the room here as well. Well, Jack said it's good that he's a new face now and then. You need an old face as well. That's me in this case. I was asked to very briefly introduce Olha Lehka-Paul, not because it's my field of research. As you may know, I'm mainly dealing with other things. And well, not only me, but also CETRA. You know that the whole history of CETRA, more than 30 years now, started off, let's say, together with what is then sometimes called the cultural turn, the literary turn, and so on and so forth. So I do think it's very interesting that we extend our reach and range of topics as well. And Olha, whom I know for 6 years now, I think, Olha, is a former CETRA Summer School participant. You know, that is a very important event and a lot of potential and a lot of talent is the result of the CETRA Summer School. Olha is a very good example of that, I think. She already was an excellent participant in 2016. I've heard her several times after that at several conferences. And what she is dealing with is something I'm interested in, but I'm not doing research on. So for me, it's more as a kind of a layperson within translation studies to see how as you said, Jack, how interdisciplinary translation studies is. And I think, especially when it's about cognitive translation studies or translation psychology or process-based translation research, we talked about terminology and what is supposed to be the correct one, or the one that is most adapted to the reality of translation studies nowadays. When you see how that subfield is developing over the past decade, over the past 15 years, then I do think it is highly interesting for, not only for me personally, but for CETRA as a center in translation studies as well. She has published the book you mentioned in the TINT series on the translator's personality, which is highly interesting also for our own students, as I have noticed yesterday when you gave a talk for the master students here at the Antwerp campus. That means also that I'm now in Antwerp and not in Tartu, where I usually am, as you know, but still very much emotionally connected to KU Leuven as well. So there was an opportunity for inviting Olha here as a very promising young scholar dealing with exactly that kind of interdisciplinary research that shows in a way, or that illustrates in a way, that translation studies, well, is not only multidisciplinary. I could see that Yves Cambier was among the audience as well. Well, we have discussed multidisciplinarity, polydisciplinarity, interdisciplinarity. I would very much like to find out how Olha presents that. Multidisciplinarity is the fact that translation studies gets a lot of input from other disciplines, but often one way. And interdisciplinarity, or real interdisciplinarity, is of course the two-way interaction. And I'm very much interested in knowing to what extent not only psychology, if I can say, has an input into translation studies, but maybe also the other way around. In this case, it's also connected to reception studies, and the project that Olha has told me about is a highly interesting one about reading text, reading translated text, to what extent that is different from reading other types of text. So I'm very happy that you're here, Olha, and I would like to invite you to take the floor.
Okay. Good. Thank you so much. Hello, everyone here in the room and online. Thank you for joining us today. Thank you for a very generous introduction, Luke and Jack. I'm very privileged and very happy to be here, to be able to talk to you today, and I'm very grateful for the invitation. That's a great honor for me. Today I'm going to talk about the exploratory study we conducted within the framework of the research project that I'm working on at the Faculty of English at Adam Mickiewicz University in Poznań. And the main aim of this exploratory study is to test whether a translator's effort that is visible, that is traceable in translation process data, actually pays off for the reader. Yeah, so that is what we wanted to see in this study we conducted only a few months ago. So from the translator's fingers to the reader's eyes, I think we can begin. Let me present to you the outline of today's talk. So I'm going to briefly mention the project and the main aim of the project that I'm working on. Then I'll try to tell you why it's interesting to look at the reception of translated texts from the empirical perspective, because it is an under-researched area still in translation studies. Then I'm going to present to you the study, the exploratory study itself, that we thought could be named as testing the process with the reader's eye movements. There are some preliminary results that I'd like to talk about, tentative conclusions, limitations, and further research. So the README project is the short name of the project, whose full name is Reading and Reception of Mediated Text, and it is financed by the Polish National Science Center. As you can see, we only started a year ago, so it's still research in its infancy. And I think it's worth mentioning at this point that for this reason, because we are only starting with this project, we've only started the project a year ago, your feedback, reflections, comments would be very much welcome and appreciated. The main aim of the project, of the README project, is to compare the reading experience of translated text with the reading experience of originally written texts. And the methodology we're going to use in the main experiments are going to be eye tracking, surveys, and questionnaires. And the study, as I've already mentioned, but I'd like to stress that again, the study I'm going to talk about today was conducted within the framework of this large-scale project. So this is the README team. From left to right, there is Professor Bogusława Wyatt, who is the principal investigator on the project and the so to say conceptual mother of the project. There is Eva Tomczak, who's our statistician, psycholinguist, Olga Witczak, whose research interests lie in post-editing research, machine translation, post-editing and machine translation. There's me, and there are two MA students who mainly help us at the stage of data collection and preparing data for analysis. So I'm happy to be able to talk in front of you and also on behalf of the whole README team. So the reading process, as we can see from this graph, the reading process is a highly complex activity, cognitive activity that consists of many different elements, many different stages, and many strands are woven into the skilled reading, and it needs to become highly strategic and highly automatic for it to be called skilled. But how does it actually happen? How do we read? Well, what we know is that we read. We don't read every word that we see in the text, although it might seem that that's what we're doing. We actually fixate on so we concentrate on around 60-65% of the words we see in the text. And those blue dots that you can see on the slide now are actually fixations. So the eye that fixates on certain points in the text. We mainly fixate on concrete words rather than abstract words, on longer words rather than shorter words, and on words that carry meaning rather than function words. And the movements between those fixations are called saccades. If the eye comes back to the previously read text, this is called regression, and there are also forward saccades if the eye moves forward. But how do we know all this? Where does this knowledge come from? We're able to know this because of the eye tracking method, which basically consists in recording the process of reading from the screen by means of reflecting the infrared light that comes from the eye tracking device onto the camera that then records the process, the movements of the eye. And based on the data collected with the eye tracking, with the help of the eye tracking method, we can know all of this that I've just talked about. And the eye tracking method is based on the general premise, the so-called eye-mind hypothesis, according to which there is no substantial lag between what the eye is concentrating on, so what the eye is fixating on, and what the mind is processing. So in simple terms, what we are looking at is what the mind is processing at the moment. And what we know, for instance, is that it is believed so that the longer the eye fixates on a certain point in the text, on a certain word, the more cognitively taxing it is for the mind to process it. But it all depends. The reading process also depends on who reads. For instance, there have been a couple of studies that showed that translation teachers, as opposed to ordinary readers or texts, evaluate translations in a much more critical way than readers and potential readers, users of the texts. Law and Kruger, for instance, found that editors, as opposed to non-editors, through experience, develop automated text processing strategies for both reading and more micro-level processing associated with errors. So it all depends on who reads. Some people might have more sophisticated, more complex reading strategies, but it also depends for which purpose we read. We can read for pleasure, for gist, for finding out specific information, for comprehension, for editing and proofreading, as we've just heard on the research that was conducted by Law and Kruger, for further functional purposes, and for translation. And we know that reading for translation is a very special type of reading, because while the research shows that while reading for translation, the translator is already creating the so-called mental map of the translation process. And while creating this mental map of the translation process, the translator surely also needs to concentrate on the end user. So, and this translator's ability to assess the target audience's knowledge and needs is essentially the ability to imagine the other person's mental state, which is also known as the theory of mind. So in a way, a translator needs to possess this theory of mind already at the stage of reading the translation, of reading the source text and then producing the translation. The translator must take into account all aspects involving readership sensitivity in order to stimulate the appropriate frame of mind in the reader. And we can also, I think, all agree that translators' decisions in language use are vital for the reader's meaning-making process. However, there is very little research testing the effect of the translator's choices made in the process of translation on the reader. Chesterman talked about 3 types of translation effects: primary effects, change of mental state in the reader; secondary or behavioral effects, so consequences of reading the translation, changes in action, knowledge, comprehension, aesthetic experience; and tertiary or social effects. And I think these have been researched quite a lot in translation studies, so observable effects in the target culture or the intercultural relationship between cultures. Jeremy Munday refers to the type of theories where the reader is put at the forefront as receptor-oriented translation theories, and he dates them back to Eugen Nida, who talked about dynamic equivalence and equivalent effect, Koller, pragmatic effect, and Newmark, communicative translation. All of these things basically stating that the translator needs to produce the text that would make a similar effect on the target reader as it did on the source text reader. Yves Cambier, in audiovisual translation, sees reception as a way or ways in which products or performances are processed, consumed, absorbed, accepted, appreciated, interpreted, understood, and remembered. And he differentiates between the 3 R's in reception, so perceptual coding, reaction or the psychocognitive issue, so the reader's processing effort, and repercussions, so an attitudinal issues, or we can refer that back to Chesterman's tertiary effects. In this study, we're mainly interested in the reader's processing efforts, so the psychocognitive issues. Walker, in his very strong call to distinguish between, in his very strong call to actually investigate the process of reading translated texts, makes a suggestion to distinguish between reception, by which he means all the reflections and ideas that a reader may have after reading the text, so the so-called post hoc process, and then experience, and this is everything that is happening emotionally, physiologically, cognitively during the act of reading. So in this case, borrowing Walker's terminology, we're interested in the reading experience, the experience of reading translated texts. In the same call to action, Walker said that what is abundantly clear at present is that we simply do not know enough about how readers actually interact with translations on a micro and macro level. And he says that the situation needs to and can change because it could lead to re-evaluation of theories and concepts at the very core of translation studies. So there seems to be a great need to actually look into, to consider readers' perspective and to look into how readers perceive or experience translated texts. Chesterman, much earlier, said that there is a need for more psychological studies of comprehension and readability with respect to various kinds of translation. Kruger and Kruger, and this was the ultimate motivation for our project and for this particular study, said that translation research requires both theoretical and empirical work investigating the intertwined reciprocal relationship between how translators make decisions, and that's what we're going to talk about today, about how to translate and how recipients, readers, then respond to these decisions at various levels. Of course, even though there were not too many studies into how readers process translated text, there have been a few that I would like to talk about. In particular, Kruger talked about or investigated child and elderly readers' processing of foreignized elements in translated South African picture books. And even though the results were not uniform or very much straightforward, but it seems that the presence of foreignizing elements in the translations, does seem to boost cognitive processing in both child and adult readers. Walker compared the reading experience of source text readers with that of target text readers with an emphasis on equivalent effect. And he found that in case in the translation, the stylistic marked elements were not preserved, the effect, the processing effort of the target readers were not the same as that of the source text readers. And a group of researchers working on a very interesting project, reception being one of the elements in that project, investigated whether it is more difficult or perhaps not, for readers to process machine translation rather than human translated versions of texts. And they did find that users experience a higher cognitive load when working with empty rather than human translated versions. And now let me present to you the study that we designed to tap into the process of reading translated texts. We wanted to connect, in line with Kruger and Kruger's claim, to connect the cognitive dimensions of producing translations, so how translators, what kind of decisions they make in the process of translation and the process of reception by the reader. The materials we used were two translated texts. There was a product description and an excerpt from a literary text. All of these texts, these two texts, were translated in our previous projects. So we were able to, in a way, recycle the data we already have from the translation sessions, from the previous translation sessions. Those were texts translated from English into Polish. So we do have the record of the translation process collected using the key login method, translog. Plus, we also have in one of the projects, we had the eye tracking data as well from the translation process. But we're not going to talk about the eye tracking data from the translation process today, just the key login data. The translations we chose differ in terms of quality because we were interested in finding out whether translation quality, the quality of translations differed, changed in any way or influenced the reader's processing effort. So we chose the product description, the translation of the product description that was by our reviewers evaluated as a high quality translation and as a low quality translation. And we also had a machine translation and a low quality human translation of a literary text. So the methods we used, as I've already mentioned, we had data from translation process data from the previous experiments, and those behavioral data were collected with the help of translog. And in this experiment, we asked readers to translate these texts, translated texts. The texts were translated by professional translators, by the way. We asked the readers just to read the texts, and we used an eye tracker to collect the data. So the procedure was the following. The aim was to collect the data from the reading processes of translated texts. There were 20 participants. In total, the participants were the students, language students at the Faculty of English. 10 participants read a high-quality translation of a product description and a machine translation of a literary text, and 10 participants read a low-quality translation of a product description and a low-quality translation of a literary text. In fact, all of these participants read 5 texts, including a baseline text that we used. That was the first text they read. We used it as a training session just for the readers to get used to the experimental procedure, but they also read, apart from these 3 texts, right? They also read 2 more that we did not analyze simply for this talk, but we are still planning to do that. We're still planning to gather more data. So it's just the first stage of research in this case. The eye movements were recorded with the iLink plus to the 1000 plus. And then after the reading session, which was pretty short, the texts were short. I will show you the more detailed description of the materials in a moment. The reading session lasted 10 to 15 minutes. And then the participants were asked to answer 4 comprehension questions after reading each text, and a question whether the text encouraged them to buy the product, or in case of literary translation, to read the book further. This is our experimental setting. Of course, this is not what the experiment looked like. This is just for you to see what our lab looks like. So we've got our principal investigator, Professor Bogusława Wyatt, in the middle, and then there is our student who's pretending to be our participant. And we are also pretending that we're looking at the eye tracking data at the eye. So this is just to show that for our experiment, to make sure that the quality of the data is good enough, we also used the chin rest. Yeah, so our participants were reading from the screen, but we used the chin rest to ensure good quality of the data. So the materials we used, as I've already mentioned, there was a baseline text, there was an original text written in Polish, but it was quite similar in terms of all formal characteristics to the other texts, so the experimental texts. And there was a high-quality translation and a low-quality translation of a product description. That was description of a ceiling fan, and I'd like to draw your attention to the last column, so the quality. Quality is perhaps the most controversial issue in translation studies. In this particular case, in the case of product description, as you already know, we used data from the previous project, and then in that project, we asked reviewers. There were 2 reviewers reading each text to evaluate translations done by professional translators and to find errors. Yeah? So this was error-based methods of quality assessment. We selected the 2 texts that I'm showing you now, so high-quality translation and low-quality translation, based on the number of errors as identified by the reviewers. So a high-quality translation had the smallest number of errors, and the low-quality translation had the largest number of errors. But for the literary translation, as it was taken from a different project and a different quality scheme was used there, again, I'd like to draw your attention to the last column, so quality. In this case, it wasn't error-based quality assessment. It was based on Malcolm Williams' assessment grid. And again, each translation done by a professional translator was evaluated by 2 reviewers. So the procedure was the same, but the assessment grid was something slightly different. And in this case, again, we just chose the text, the translation that was considered to be of lowest quality by our reviewers. And the machine translation was not evaluated. We just selected, we tried a couple of machine translation tools, and we chose the worst, according to the worst version, according to our estimation. Then the translators' profiles, as you can see, the high-quality translation was produced of the product description, was produced by a much more experienced translator, and he or she also took much more time to produce the translation. In the case of literary text, the translator was we can say pretty much experienced as well, 9 years of experience. And as you can see, even though the length of the text was similar, the time devoted to translating literary text was much longer. Yeah? So it took the translator to translate this text much longer than the product description. Now let's talk about the readers a bit. Most of our readers were female. They were also both pretty much competent in both languages, in both their first language, native tongue, and their second language, so English. We also asked them a couple of questions regarding their reading habits. Sorry. And most of them admitted that they loved reading for pleasure, and also that they don't only read when they have to. The good news was that they were used to reading from the screen, because they admitted that they most of the time read text on a digital screen, so computer, tablets, and so on and so forth. So this was good news for the ecological validity of this experiment, because we could say that our readers were used to reading text from the screen. So the questions we wanted to investigate were the following: how does the reader's effort differ when reading a low quality versus a high quality translation? And that was about the product description text, machine translation versus a low quality human translation. The second question was, in what way does the translator's effort, as indicated by the stretches of text produced with the most or the least effort, and this is where we had a chance to use data, behavioral data from the previous projects from the translation process, relate to the reader's effort. And the third question was, how do translation and language errors affect the reader's effort? And now I'm going, of course, to tell you how we operationalized effort, both translator's effort and reader's effort. So when it comes to translator's effort, we calculated it on the basis of total time to produce a sentence in milliseconds, divided by the number of characters with spaces in the final product. And here I should mention that the sentence was our area of interest. Yeah? So each sentence was a different area of interest. And the reader's effort was calculated as dwell time, so total fixations duration, to read the sentence divided by the number of characters with spaces in the target text, and that is in line with Walker 2019. But we also looked at average fixation duration, dwell time in second and third run. Second and third run are the cases when the reader had to revisit the text once again, or some parts of the text once again, after reading it till the end for the first time. Yeah? So first time, second run, and third run. So these are measures of rereading. The results for the first research question, fan is a code word for the product description. So whenever you see fan, that's the product description text. Once again, let's see what the question was. So how does the reader's effort differ when reading a low quality versus a high quality translation, machine translation versus a low quality human translation? And as you can see, statistical analyses show that there is more readers' effort put into reading a low quality translation of a product description than a high quality translation of a product description. And this, so there was statistically significant differences for all measures we had. So average fixation duration, dwell time per number of characters, second run dwell time, and third run dwell time. So low quality translation required more effort, more processing effort from the reader. This is just to illustrate, to show you the data I've just talked about. And the results for the other texts, for the literary texts, were quite similar and perhaps also predictable and in line with research conducted on machine translation versus human translation that I talked about earlier. So it was, again, more difficult for the readers to process, to read machine translation than even low quality human translation. of a literary text. And this is again to illustrate the results. Results for the second research question. Again, let's recollect what the question was. In what way does the translator's effort, as indicated by the stretches of text produced with the most or the least effort, relate to the reader's effort? And here, the first thing we did, we looked at the behavioral data from the translation process. We calculated a translator's effort for each sentence, and we selected sentences that were produced with most effort and least effort for each text. So we've got 2 sentences for a high quality translation, 2 sentences in a low quality translation, and 2 sentences in a low quality human translation. And here I should mention that because of the fact that for machine translation we don't have logically process data, here I will only concentrate on low quality human translation for a Riviera text, so for a literary translation. And the results for the high quality product description texts showed that it didn't matter for the reader whether the translator invested a lot of effort into producing the translation or very little effort. So there were no significant differences found for readers' effort in high quality translation. For low quality translation, the situation was different, and it appeared that if the translator invested little effort in producing the translation, it was also more difficult for the reader to read those sentences. Yes, so as you can see, least translator's effort reading sentence 7 was more difficult for the readers than reading a sentence that was produced with more effort. Okay, this is again just an illustration of results. And when it comes to the Riviera text, which is a code word for the literary translation text, here we had low quality human translation. And here, as you can see, reading sentence 4, which was produced with more effort on the part of the translator, was more difficult than reading sentence 7, which was produced with little effort. So the bottom line seems to be that even though it was difficult for the translator to produce the sentence, to produce the translation of the sentence, it was also difficult for the reader still to read the translation. And this is open. This finding is open to interpretation. My idea would be perhaps that there might be an effect of the text type, because here we're talking about 2 different text types: literary text and a more informative text. But this would need to be verified in further research. And this is again just to illustrate the data with some graphs. And finally, results for the third research question. Again, now we're talking about the errors. Yes, so how do translation and language errors affect the reader's effort? And we looked at, first of all, we looked at low quality translation. We wanted to see what was it that was different from a high quality translation, something that was not preserved in the low quality translation, but was there in a high quality translation. And we selected 3 sentences. In sentence 4, there was lack of adaptation from Fahrenheit to Celsius. In sentence 7, there was a problem with logic. So there was an opposite meaning that appeared in the low quality translation. And sentence 8, there was a lack of adaptation again from feet to meters. And let's see what the results were. As you can see, the low quality translation was more difficult to read for the readers than a high quality translation for all 3 sentences. Yeah? So it appears that errors in a low quality translation do affect, in this case, the processing effort that readers have to invest. And then when it comes to the literary text, again, the same question. So how do translation language errors affect the reader's effort? And here we compared machine translation and low quality human translation, and again selected 3 sentences that contained errors in machine translation and that were translated in a more proper way in a low quality human translation. So in sentence 3, there was a word for word idiom translation. I tried to make it easier for you to understand what I mean. So in machine translation, the idiom was translated as "will play as tight as drums," and in low quality human translation, it was translated in a more understandable way. So it was brought closer to the reader. So the will burst into due to overeating. The original idiom was, as far as I remember, very similar to what we have in machine translation. So will be as tight as drums, which basically means that people will burst due to overeating. So what the human translator did. Sentence 5, there was a word-for-word epithet translation. Was a bluff, and in case of low-quality human translation was plain spoken or direct. And in sentence 7, there were some typos and punctuation mistakes in machine translation, and there were no such mistakes in low-quality human translation. And as you can see, for a Riviera text, the results are not that similar to those that we saw for the product description text. So the third sentence, which contained word-for-word idiom translation, was in terms of dwell time per characters with spaces, it was more difficult to read machine translation. Perhaps you remember, yeah, this was just a word-for-word translation, which made very little sense. But when it comes to the low-quality human translation, it appears that our readers actually reread the text, the translation, came back to the translation during the second and third run, more than in the case of machine translation. But for sentence 5, so in case of word-for-word epithet translation, it was again more difficult to process a machine translation, which again made no sense for the readers than a low-quality human translation. And there were no such differences, at least no statistically significant differences when it comes to sentence 7 that contained typos and punctuation mistakes. Now I'll briefly talk about the comprehension questions that we asked our readers to answer after reading each text. So as you can see here, there is bad fan, good fan, which is low quality product description text, and good quality, high quality product description. And as you can see, there's practically no difference between comprehension scores on the first 4 questions. So it does not seem to the quality of translations does not seem to affect the comprehension of the texts. For a Riviera text, the situation is very similar. So both machine translation and low quality human translation was understood pretty well by our readers. So again, quality did not seem to affect comprehension. And when it comes to the last question we asked them, so for product description, it was, having read the text, would you purchase the product? 50-50, yes. So again, there were not too many differences or no differences at all when it comes to low quality versus high quality translation. And the last question we asked for the literary translation was, having read the extract, would you like to read the rest of the story? And here there were some differences, but of course to interpret the results, to interpret these findings, we would need to have more participants, more data, and then we could say what that actually means. So for some tentative conclusions, translation quality seems to influence the ease of reading, but in the case of literary translation, it was actually easier for the readers to process a low-quality human translation than machine translation, which is in line with research that has been conducted already. The fluency or ease of producing a translation does not always overlap with the fluency of reading. Translation errors do affect the fluency of reading, and the quality of translation did not affect the comprehension scores or the willingness to buy the advertised product, with the exception of the influence on the willingness to read the story further, but this would have to be still verified with more participants. And now about certain limitations of this study and further research avenues. Of course, we need to have more participants to draw valid conclusions. We need to focus on a more global scale, right? As the project is in this project, we're interested in comparing the reading of translated text with reading of originally written text. That's what we are planning to do. And on this project, we are affiliated with the University of Bologna, so we are going to include 3 languages in our projects: Polish, English, and Italian. So this is still what we have to do. These are the references, and thank you for your attention. Thank you. I would be happy to answer your questions if you have any.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you so much, Ola, for a really fascinating look into the mind of the translator, but also the mind and the eyes of the reader. It's a really fascinating domain. There's plenty of questions, I'm sure. And so I don't want to pose a question right off the bat, except to say what's next. I mean, maybe there's you can go into a little bit more detail about what the next phases of this project are, and kind of give us a sneak peek at what's next on board.
Yes, thank you. Well, we are going to, as I've already mentioned, we are going to continue collecting data on this experiment. Yes, so we're still going to get some more data in order to have some more valid conclusions. And then we are going to compare how readers read originally written text versus how they do read translated texts. Yeah, so that will be the next project. And we are planning to do that both in Italy, as we are affiliated with the University of Bologna on this project, and in Poznan in Poland.
Yeah. And will that be focused on a certain text type, or will you also be doing sort of the more advertising text types alongside literary texts, or?
We'll have literary texts for that. Yes, so we will
focused on literary texts.
We'll focus on literary texts.
Okay.
So that's going to be a fascinating journey, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Let's open the floor for questions from the audience here. I see there's already several hands from the audience online. I'm not sure who was first, so I see Yves. Maybe we'll start with you, Yves.
Yeah, I would like to ask.
Please turn on your camera and your mic. Yeah,
it's open.
We can't hear you.
Sorry? It's open.
Oh no, we can hear Professor Gambier.
Okay.
Oh yes, here's something.
Yes, I think we can hear you.
Me? Can you hear me? Yeah, only 2 questions of clarification. Number 1, you said that the participants were students of English. Do you mean English or in translation, program of translation?
No, we specifically did not want to have translation students, so we invited students of English, so language learners.
Okay, thank you. And the second one, what kind of information did you give to the students before the test? Did they know why they have to read the two pieces?
They just knew that they were going to read a text. We did not tell them that these were going to be translations or anything else.
I understand that, but did they know the purpose? Why did they have to read the text?
For comprehension, yes. So they need to read for comprehension. That's what they were asked to do.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we have a question from. No, I don't see a first name, but Gupirafa Arena.
Hi, I'm in a shared office, so I'm not going to put on my camera. Thank you for the talk. It was very interesting. And I wanted to ask you, maybe it's not directly related to what you explained today, but how did you use, or how do you see the login data, so the key login data being used to relate to how the readers read the text, because at the moment you look at the errors in the sentences and you look at the time effort. But how was the keylogging data that you use in the translation phase? How is this going to be related or used for the reception part? Is it more keylogging, more keystrokes? Are you also going to analyze how keystrokes influence then the reading, or how is all these instruments related then in reception? I don't know if I am clear.
Yes, I'll try to answer that. Yeah, thank you for your question. I think this is a highly interesting question, in fact, and a very interesting domain to look into. I'm not sure we're going to do this in this project, as this is not really the aim of the project. We only started with that to sort of test the ground a little bit. And because we were interested in that, we saw that there is a gap in research there. But I don't think we are going to continue sort of bringing closer keylogging data, looking at the translator's effort and reader's effort. Yeah, we only want to concentrate in this project on the reading process. Yeah, so how readers process original text versus translated text. And I'm sure the question you're asking, well, to answer it, we would need to have a separate project, I think. So we would need to put a lot more thought into that, how to combine keylogging data and then with reception. But that would be highly interesting, I think.
And the second question is, you mentioned this machine translation, and you selected the one with the most errors, but you don't mention the engine. Which engine did you use? Was it trained specifically, or you just used public, Google, DeepL, whatever?
Yes, we just used public. We tried a couple of them, and we just used, I think the text we ended up with, the translation, the bad translation we ended up with was done with Google Translate. Yes, we just went with the available one.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I ask a follow-up question?
Yeah, sure.
It's related, right? So your findings were, if I'm not mistaken, that the reader's experience of the machine translation for the literary translation was more successful, or I mean, I'm thinking back to the question of would you read this book?
Yeah.
And more people who read the machine translation said yes, and there was a very small number, maybe 10% or something, who answered yes to the bad human translation.
Mm-hmm.
What does that mean for the future of literary translation? And maybe what I guess the question is, why the decision to focus on those two translators, a machine translator and a bad human translator, and not more variations of translator types? Maybe would that be interesting to look into, or what do you think?
Yes, definitely. That would be very interesting. As I've said, this was just to test the experimental procedure, yeah, this particular study. So we are just starting. The project is just 1 year into the project. And we used literary text because it was the text that was translated for my PhD project. Okay. So that was an opportunity for me to do something more with the data I already have.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I think we are not going to continue comparing machine translation and literary translation here in this case, yeah, in a similar manner. So this is not the global aim of this project.
Were you surprised by that result?
Yes, I was definitely very much surprised, but I've got an assumption, maybe it's wrong, and these are just some, reflections of mine looking at the data, that perhaps because of the fact that machine translation did not make too much sense, maybe it made readers think that it might be worthwhile reading more and trying to, make sense of it.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, so that might be one of the explanations. And for low quality human translation, they said, okay, it's bad, I'm not going to read it further. So that could have been the reason, but yeah, we would definitely need more data to support that assumption. Yeah.
Interesting. We have a question from I haven't actually looked at the room. Are there questions in the room? Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, or you can read it.
Yeah.
It's a short question. If you already have it's about whether there are differences between how a reader reads the translation versus a text that was written that's not translated.
Mm-hmm. Yes, thank you. That's a very relevant, very interesting question. So what we assume might happen is that because of the fact that it is believed that translated texts contain language that is, let's say, more simplified, more adjusted to the reader, yeah, then it might be easier for the potential reader to read translations than original written texts. Yeah, that's what we want to test. That's what we want to see in this project.
Okay, question from Zhu Renwen.
Yeah, thank you very much for the very informative talk. Both of my questions are focused on the assessment of the reader's comprehension. So my first question is, what the comprehension questions are composed of? Are they multiple choice questions, or are they choose or four choose questions?
Thank you for the question. So comprehension questions were actually very simple, as you've seen in the slide. We used a chin rest to make sure that the quality of the eye tracking is good. So we couldn't have multiple choice questions really. We just had yes or no questions, yeah, for the participants to be able to click just either the right shift or the left shift, and that's it. And that's how we designed the experiment. So yes or no questions.
All right, thank you very much. But also, if you use the yes or no questions or true or false questions, I'm wondering on which text are they based on? Are they based on the original ST, or are they based on the translated TT? Because the translation quality varies in the translated version. So.
Yes, the questions were based on the text that the reader has just read. Yeah, so the translations.
Okay. So they are based on the translated target text, and to see whether they're true or false.
Yes, because the readers did not know that they were reading the translations, right? They were just reading the texts, and that the comprehension questions were related to the texts they've read.
Okay, thank you very much. That's all of my questions.
Okay, I see there is a question in the chat from Donna. She asks, I'll just come next to you.
Okay.
She asks, thank you for your amazing lecture. Could you elaborate on the error classification you use for the translation of the text associated with products?
Error classification. That comes from the, thank you for your question, of course, that comes from the previous project, as I said. I would need to perhaps consult my colleagues on that one, because I was just a research assistant in that project, so I don't know all the details there. But they designed a specific assessment sheet that included errors that the reviewers used to evaluate translations. So I'm not very much competent, I think, to answer this particular question. I'm sorry, yeah, but that was in the previous project.
Thank you. The question from Heidi Kotze. Heidi?
Yeah, I'm here. Thank you very much. That was really interesting. I want to just go back to something that Eve asked earlier and that you also just commented on. So the fact that your readers did not know that they were reading a translation, right? Am I correct? Yeah. And so that was a conscious choice that you'd made. But I'm wondering, so your project is interested in whether the reading processes differ for the reading of original and translated texts, right? And so that's not something that your current design is really answering, or do I misunderstand that correctly? Because Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. We just wanted to test the length of the text. Yeah, we wanted to see how long that would take, what kind of comprehension questions we could ask. Yeah, so this was just to test the ground, really, this particular study.
So I'm kind of curious, what do you think would happen if you were to tell some of your readers that they were reading a translated text and other ones that they were not, right? Because I think it's not only about the question of, well, are they actually reading an original or a translated text? It's also about whether they think they are reading an original and a translated text, because we know that these sorts of preconceptions shape how people read. So that might be, I think that would be fascinating to see whether if you just, give this information, different sets of information beforehand, whether that actually changes the way that they respond. Do you think it would?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I think this is highly interesting. I will definitely pass this idea over to my team. Thank you. Yeah, that's great. That's a great suggestion. Yeah. Thank you.
Other questions from the room or online?
I'm in the same spirit of Jack's question. So what does it say for translation studies? The fact that the quality of the translation does not affect the comprehension of the resulting text, because our discipline has obsessed for a long time in mistakes and pointing a mistake in the translation. So, and it seems that at the end of the day, it's not that relevant according to your results. So it's not exactly a question, and I understand that it may go beyond your scope of your work, but I think it's a relevant question for our discipline.
Yes, it definitely is. One of the things I was thinking while listening to your comment, I thought that just the mind is so strong and complex that it is just able to fill in the gaps, even if the quality is not good enough. That's my only reflection.
I guess it's related also. Do we pursue just the comprehension, or do we have further goals?
Yeah,
it's very interesting.
Thank you.
Another comment or question from Anna Gubera-Farenas.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment on comprehension and experience. I've done several experiments on reception studies with machine translation and post-edited text and human. And usually the comprehension questions do not differ significantly, except when reading the original text. So I'm not sure, like one of the people asked, I cannot recall the name, it very much also depends on how you formulate the comprehension questions. And so I don't think comprehension gives us a full picture of the reading experience. That's why I think we need to use engagement questionnaires and other type of questionnaires that I've been using, because you get a much fuller picture of what the reader is experiencing. And of course, interviewing the readers is also very good, especially if you have eye tracking data, because then you can really ask them how they felt about it. So comprehension, in my experience, is a bit limiting.
Yes, thank you for this comment. I fully agree with you. We actually, it was very difficult for us to formulate those comprehension questions. And I think that for the main experiment, we are not going to use them. Indeed, so as you've mentioned, it's very complicated, it does not show the full picture. I fully agree with you on this. And yeah, it would be very interesting to use the engagement questionnaires, for instance, yeah, as you've...
I use the comprehension, for online, because otherwise people don't read the text. So the comprehension was a way to make sure that they had actually read the text. So if you are planning to do anything online, then you do need to test if people are reading the text. But in a control environment, as in a lab, well, it's a nice data point, right? But I don't think you are going to see a lot of differences, because you are seeing them read, right? When you do it online, you have to check, because otherwise people might not read the text and then answer the questions. you know.
Yes. Thank you.
Okay, other questions from the room?
Curious, and I know that you need to narrow your data at some point and make choices, but if you broaden your experiment to readers with other reading habits, so people who normally don't read, for example, would you expect your results to change in some way? I mean, this is probably just a speculation, but what would you expect?
In inviting, just like to clarify whether I understand the question well. So to invite other types of readers, yeah?
Yeah, you mentioned at the beginning of your presentation, you gave some information about the reading habits of your interviewees, right? And you mentioned that most of them frequently read.
Yes.
What would happen with people that is maybe less familiar with the act of reading?
That would be also an interesting thing to look into. Just wondering whether we would find people who, it would be difficult to find people, yeah, who don't read a lot, who would admit that they don't read a lot.
I mean, maybe they have studied, but they don't have this hobby among their hobbies. I'm not talking about illiterate people, people who have less interest in literature, for example.
Yeah, that would be a nice area to look into. Thank you.
Okay. Other questions from the room? From the rooms? Luke?
No, very much interested in everything I've heard, but I don't have a question.
Okay, okay.
And still reflecting.
I see a pondering face is why I
that's
asked.
true.
All right. Well, if there's no more questions, we can round off a little bit early. So I would like to thank you all for joining us online and here on the campus in Antwerp, and a big thank you to our CETRA fall lecture giver, Olha Lehka-Paul. Thank you very much for being here and for sharing your research and your expertise with our colleagues. And we look forward to the future results, and thank you very much for being here.
Thank you very much for inviting me here and for listening to my presentation, for all your feedback and comments, and for all of those online as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.